Call to order this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. All right, first item is approval of the agenda. Any comments on the agenda? If not, do we have a motion to approve it?
I move.
I second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, moving forward, next is approval of the December 9th, 2024 meeting minutes. Any comments or revisions on that after reviewing? If not, we could take a motion to approve the minutes.
So move.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, that takes us on to the public forum. Again, just a reminder this, and it's in the agenda there. This is time for public to make comments on topics of concern to the HPC, other than those on the agenda, or they can be comments with something that's coming up on the agenda. Just a note there, during public forum, the commission is not likely to act on comments. If it's something that is on the agenda for later in the meeting, that is the time in which the commission would discuss further amongst us and then would take action or make motions should something come up at that time. But either way, we'll open it up for public forum. Anybody that wants to come forward can hop up to the mic there and just state your name and anything you have to share. Not seeing any takers, so we will move on. So item 5 on our agenda is the CLG Certified Local Government Annual Report Review.
Yes, you recall at the December meeting, you first looked at the work plan from last year and talked about how you'd like to change it for this year. And on the screen, I've got the one proposed for this year with the changes the commission directed. And then also in your packet are some questions from the CLG annual report that describe, what sort of activities you've done this calendar year, the meetings you've had, certificates of appropriateness, any public education programs, and any issues or challenges or successes that you've accomplished or encountered in this past year. And so those are in your packet, those answers to those questions in the report. The numbering changed from the last meeting because they've changed the numbering in this year's report. So it's basically the same questions, but they renumbered. But the primary thing is the work plan, the 2025 work plan. And one of the changes from the commission had to do with something that Kate brought up. And let's see here.
It's under goal 3.
Yep.
It was, my suggestion was to,
Yes.
with regard to chapter 33, think about ways to allow non-original but consistent looking materials that were more energy efficient. So that change was made. But along with that, I wasn't intending that it would be the only thing that we might think about with chapter 31. I think there are other changes we might want to talk about with respect to chapter 31. So I wouldn't want to limit it to only energy efficiency.
Oh, okay.
And this wording limits it to only energy efficiency. So can we make it, I mean, the way it was in,
You can change it however you want.
okay, I'd suggest that we look at the wording from 2024, where they had continued to review chapter 31 as a specific item, and add that to consider changes to chapter 31 historic preservation municipal code to allow exterior materials, blah, 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 that are in the 2025 plan.
So take the wording from 2024 and then add the wording that you came up with at the last meeting.
Great.
Include both.
Yep.
Okay.
I also have a question. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, so if it's not, obviously shut me down, but our efforts as a commission and as the city staff are almost, I would say 99% focused on appearance, the appearance of infrastructure. And when I read the code and when I look at the state code, there's an awful lot of stuff in there about resources in general and some language on usage and stuff like that. But I think about the emphasis on all the historic resources. And I think Ames has lots of resources that are not limited to buildings. For instance, there's a house across the street from me that George Washington Carver lived in. It's kind of passed around by word of mouth, but we don't do much about that. We don't celebrate that. We don't celebrate Amelia Earhart building her airplane in a garage here. There are a lot of resources that are peripherally related to infrastructure, but are not exclusively. There's a lot of history in Ames that I think maybe the commission might consider in our purview, but I don't know. I don't want. So I'm kind of opening this up to the commission to find out if you think, nope, we're limited to infrastructure, period, or if you think there's a larger discussion we could have about other resources.
I like the idea of recognizing historic buildings or locations or events in Ames. And this kind of ties back into the Underground Railroad comments that I was making in an earlier meeting. So yes, I would support something like that very, very much.
I guess there's a question there, but then so obviously, I mean, we have the Old Town Historic District, which is where most of our purview is. But celebrating stuff outside of that district, I would say, in terms of recognition and events, is certainly things we're allowed to do and would be within our purview. Is that the question, just in terms of can we put focus on recognizing those sort of things, or are you doing a step forward to should we be advocating for jurisdiction over certain things on decisions?
Yeah, I don't think we can change jurisdiction.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that one is
I don't know
obviously
about
a
that, but
ordinance coded overlay thing, so that one we can't really, that's much bigger topic, but yeah.
right. I think I'm just talking about starting to use the commission to appreciate
Yeah.
things that are resources that are beyond infrastructure. And that would, of course, since the staff does all the work, that would then imply that there's some staff effort behind that too.
So are you thinking in terms of education? Like having
Education,
programs?
recognition, preservation, their oral history. I don't know what it is, frankly.
Yeah.
But the more I read the code and the chapters, and I see the word resources all over and occasionally the word uses, and that's beyond to me just structures. It seems like there might be a responsibility that we're not living up to.
I wonder what role does the Ames History Museum play in this?
Yeah, probably a
It seems
part.
like that might be more appropriate to what they do.
Well, they're not a government organization, so they have no responsibilities to the city.
Could there be some kind of a collaboration?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Maybe we could ask the staff to come up with suggestions on how they might consider opportunities to protect non-infrastructure, if you will, protect and recognize and all of that. For instance, in the preservation awards, if you look at it, everything is about infrastructure except for the one of the items in the special award category or special recognition category, I guess. And again, I think there's a lot of historic preservation that isn't buildings.
Well, and like Ray mentioned, that would work towards education of the community and the public about our history
Yes.
in the structures that we have, in the locations. And even if there may not be a place or the original building there now, it'd be interesting to know that, yes, this is where this took place in this time frame, and how that's tied into history. I hope I didn't misspeak. Oh, I hope I didn't misspeak about what you said.
Oh, no.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, you need to be a little closer to the.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at sounds like it could fit as a goal that almost, I mean, kind of falls under the goal number 4 in a way, not necessarily, but I mean, I think as a commission, we're open to supporting such things to an extent. Once it comes to requesting staff time for things, I mean, obviously we have the ability to do so. We have to request those and it can be approved or not. I think when it gets outside of what our role in the ordinance is, it's probably, changes probably aren't great that we're going to get staff time for that, just because there's a lot of other things the city's spending money on too. But I think it's certainly open for us as a commission to request such things or pursue things ourselves as well, and kind of push some of those issues to the forefront. So
That'd be great.
in summation, I think what you're suggesting is, yeah, I agree, that can be a goal for us to do and pursue. All right, any other comments after reading through the work plan there? Ray, any questions on those comments on how to apply them, or?
Oh, I
Did that
just
sound
want to
pretty-
make sure, because, we'll change the 2025
Yeah.
work plan that goes to city council for approval,
Yep.
To incorporate what Kate is saying,
Mhm.
if the commission recommends it that way. So I just want to make sure I get that right. So Kate, you're on the 2024, it says continue, it says, continue review of chapter 31. Is that that's not the one that you,
For the energy
Point.
one, if you're talking about the energy one,
That was-
I would just add continue review to chapter 31 underneath where you have the energy one on the 2025 plan. So there'd be 2 bullets
okay?
under that. One would be the way it's written today in the 2025 plan. The second bullet would say continue review of chapter 31, full stop. So that would
Okay.
allow us to look at other things in 31 besides besides energy.
Okay,
Okay.
2 bullets,
Yes, sir.
2024, and then the one you had last time.
Yes, sir. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
All right, if everybody is good on that one, I think we can move on to the next item, unless, Ray, do you need any, you'll revise it
I
one
think
more
a
time right
motion-
before we,
To recommend to the city council that they approve the work plan for 2025 as
yeah, as amended in
the
today's.
draft,
Okay.
approved, that the commission approves the draft of the
Yep.
2025 work plan is that they recommend approval of that by the city council.
Sounds good. In that case, I'll make that motion. So I'll motion that we approve the 2025 work plan as amended with the comments of today's meeting to go to the city council for review and approval.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Moving forward, next item is the 2025 Historic Preservation Awards Program.
Okay. What the commission is deciding tonight is whether or not you want to go ahead with a awards program for 2025. And if so, I'm trying to get the nomination form to pop up here, but it hasn't yet. So the question is whether you want to proceed with an awards program again this year, as you have done for the last several years for 2025. If so, we will send out a press release and send out a notice to the neighborhood contacts, encouraging people to apply for the Historic Preservation Awards. And then those will be due by February 20th. And once received, then we'll bring those to the commission and you can decide which ones you feel merit awards. And then it would go on to the city council to present those awards along with the chair of the commission at their meeting, probably their second meeting in April. So it's really deciding whether or not you want to go ahead with the awards program for this year.
Sounds good. Can open it up to discussion on the commission. I would presume that we do. I know in the past we've, last year the response was fairly minimal. Granted, the response we had were quality nominations, so that made it pretty easy to go with them. So, I mean, the one concern would be just what our response is going to be, but at the same time, the list of awards that are on the nomination form right now, we don't have to award everything every year, even if we get nominations in and if we deem that, they don't meet the standard of the award, then we just don't award it. There's not really a sunk cost necessarily in my mind of doing the program, the awards program, but certainly open to discussion from the rest of the commission too on if there's any thoughts otherwise.
I would think that if the awards motivate property owners to preserve, maintain, recognize the historical significance, if that's a motivating factor, then we should encourage it. And if it comes down to the time that you're going to make the awards and you have no applicants or you don't feel like you have a qualified applicant, do we accept applicants outside of the historical district?
Yes,
We
we don't
don't-
have to, some of the awards don't have
so-
to be within the Old Town Historic.
So there may be an opportunity to go out to some other neighborhoods and
Mhm.
maybe motivate them.
Yep, absolutely. Because last year, for example, one of the awards went to a building that's in downtown. It's not in the Old Town Historic District. So, yeah, it's a open community wide for nominations.
So can you have a new structure that was built to look old? No, that's
Yeah,
a
I think-
serious.
No,
Yeah, I
I
think
thought
it's
it's an
serious.
innovative question, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
I
an
think
open
there's a-
nomination, so they would be.
I thought there was a
There is a
50-year
category.
limit on something.
might-
Yeah, there's a
Depends on-
category, number 4, architecturally compatible,
Yep.
new additions or structures. So
Yep.
I would read that in there, yeah.
Mhm.
Are there any that would reward people for making renovations that were energy efficient but still consistent with the requirements of or the intent of the code?
If I recall, I don't think there's one that specifically spells that out as a criteria.
I don't,
That might fall
could we think
just
about that
generally
for
within
next year?
another one, but yeah, we could think about that as a category if we want to.
Probably go along with the
form that.
sustainability goals and all that.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, if there's not any other comments, I would motion to approve that the nomination forms for the 2025 Historic Preservation Awards Program be issued.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed, same sign. All right. On to item 7 on the agenda, which is the commission's comments portion. We have one bullet point under there, which is discussion of the Historic Preservation Commission's letter sent to the mayor and city council regarding a zoning text amendment. So I think we can start with that one, and when we get through discussion of that item, commission comments is open, that if you have anything additional that we want to discuss outside of that item also, we can do so. But I'd suggest maybe we start with the one that's presented here first. So
I have a question. Did we ever receive a response from the mayor or the city council?
we did not, no. And so I think it's printed off here. So this letter here, that was coming out of our last meeting when we motioned to send a memo to the city council, essentially asking for clarification as it was brought to our attention. Some text in the ordinance that would seem to indicate that the HPC should review zoning amendments that affect the Old Town Historic District. So this letter was sent originally that same night, and then again, sent to staff that night, and then again ahead of the ZBOA meeting last week. So early last week, it was sent directly to the council and mayor via email as well. But yeah, that's essentially where I got to. And so there wasn't, we haven't had any official communication with any other city department on that matter. So.
Well, the issue that brought this up is an ongoing dispute between the Old Town District and the city zoning authorities. And at a meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment, January 8, they denied Old Town's request that the Historic Preservation Commission be advised or notified of any changes that would affect the Old Town District. And Old Town lost that on a vote, although we haven't seen any written ruling yet. And I don't know if there are people from Old Town District want to say something, and otherwise I will have a statement to present that maybe the commission should take a stance on how we interpret the statute in question. Maybe I should start with that.
Would you like to comment now, or what's your order?
I think if we can keep it brief, public forums where comments are supposed to occur from people outside of the commission, obviously none occurred during that time. For the sake of listening, we'll allow a couple quick comments here. Though.
Yeah, David Carter, 709 Douglas. I brought forth the issue in public forum, is that right? At your last meeting, and as Mr. Ewald said, it's advanced some, and there was a hearing at the ZBA. And our position continues to be that simple reading of the Section 29 ordinance seems to require that zoning amendments that affect the historic district should come here first. And so there's the main reason, as indicated in the code purpose, in that section purpose, and the way it's labeled, is to provide some notice both to the commission and to the public, especially to the historic district. And one thing has come to my attention in reading your bylaws, that certainly is the case. There's much more notice. In a procedure that bypasses historic preservation, the amendment goes first to the Planning and Zoning Commission. There is no notice to the public of that hearing. And then P&Z makes a recommendation to council, and council can take their recommendation with a draft ordinance, and at that first hearing at the council, pass the ordinance. So there's the only notice the council is required to give is a publication in the paper 7 days ahead of time. In the procedure where it comes first to Historic Preservation Commission, it's a lot different. And I wasn't aware till I read your bylaws, but when a item comes to you that requires your recommendation to go on to eventually city council, then you give notice with a mailing to all the residents in the district or within 200 feet of the district and in the district as well. And you do that 10 days ahead of time. So in that scenario, you would have notice at that time of a hearing at the commission here. Then following that, your recommendation would go to P&Z. And then following that, it would go to city council. And that certainly would provide much more notice to the public and to the residents of the district. The other point I wanted to make, and I was unaware of till recently, in reading your Ames Comprehensive Historic Preservation Plan and Report, which you work off of, that was written by Will Page, who's done most of the consulting work over the last 30 years here in Ames on preservation issues and National Historic District nominations, and recognized as an authority in the field. But in that report, he points out in chapter 2, where he talks about the roles of the various city boards and commissions and the council in the historic preservation arena. He mentions in chapter 2 exactly 3 times that the process involves zoning amendments coming to the Historic Preservation Commission for consideration and then going to P&Z. And I think it's important to consider that's in your guidance, basically, that you have and been working from for the last 15 years. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Either one. We got 2 hands, so feel free to. Yep.
My name is David Thielen, 3974 North Dakota Avenue. I come here as a taxpayer and also as the executive director of the Ames Romero House. We were the applicant that started the zoning text amendment process. I will say, even with the other side, they're civil. We've had good discussions. We may disagree on some of the topics, but as a community, I think it's good to have civil discourse and civil conversation. We've had that to date. So I just want to be on the record for that. I also want to say very clearly, because you probably think, well, they're on the opposite side of the HPC. We are not. We believe in what the HPC does and what it stands for. We have 2 homes on Clark Avenue. One is in the historic district. Our board of directors is very keen on the history of that beautiful orange house. And we will do everything according to code to make sure it stands up to that beautiful orange house. So we actually think we're going to increase the values of homes as opposed to some things that we've read that say we're going to decrease the value of homes by bringing us in. It serves the community because the community has a need right now, and that's serving the homeless, the poor of this community, and also preserving the HPC and what it stands for in the Old Town District. So I'm very clear on that. This has been a very lengthy process. I've been involved in every single meeting, starting back in, actually I wasn't in the July meeting, that was Matt Mitchell. I came in August. I was involved in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting in September. There was a notice that went out to the Old Town Association board. For some reason, the email wasn't distributed, but it did go out to attend that Planning and Zoning meeting. I noticed a couple here in the room were present, and myself, and we stated our views. Now, the next meeting was the October 8th meeting. A full mailer went out to everybody in the district. It was not required to do so. It wasn't required to do so at all, but the city went overboard to make sure that everybody was present for that meeting. There is a process where the planning director states clearly that the HPC, as much as we respect it, was not necessary for the meeting or the recommendation to the P&Z committee. It went to city council. City council tabled the October 8th meeting. We had an open forum at a library where everybody was invited to come in and talk on both sides. It was very civil again. We had a November 26th city council meeting when it was voted by 4-2 that the council wanted to move forward on a ZTA plan. Instead of having the entire Old Town District as a social service provider area, only one lot was picked in the compromise solution. So we think that everybody got something out of this. It's not the whole district, it's just one lot that abuts to a commercial zone on 7th Avenue. So if we are chosen and we fill out the special use permit, we're going to go in from the ZBA board again. It was very clear by the planning director that the HPC does not have a say in the use. They do have a say in the alterations, demolition, and new construction, which we agree with. It was also echoed by the city attorney, who wrote a legal opinion saying the same thing. Then last week at the ZBA meeting, unanimous vote that planning director and the city attorney were correct. So I just want to be very careful that when we make statements as to the role, and I got to be very careful here because I respect what you do, but the role should not be a political role. It should be a statement based on the facts. And right now, the facts are the city attorney, the planning director, and the ZBA. Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, Shelley Orngard, 928 Burnett. I saw you briefly at your last meeting for just a moment, and I think you'll recall that I said at that time, I complimented the efforts of Romero House to restore the home and take good care of the historic character of that place to the best of their ability. But I want to talk about a different, actually the key matter that Mr. Thielen just spoke about, and that is how the municipal code is understood. and the ZBA meeting, because this is kind of the crux of the issue, is the planning director made a judgment that use is not a factor, and that the zoning text amendment would not affect the neighborhood, in meaning like the physical attributes of the neighborhood. But I would like to read from the municipal code number 31, just read the purpose. And I think that you can see that it's actually broader than talking about parking spaces and roof inclines and things like that. The purpose of this chapter is to promote the educational, cultural, and economic welfare of the public of the city by preserving and protecting historic structures, sites, and neighborhoods which serve as visible reminders of the history and cultural heritage of the city, state, or nation. That talks about the whole city, not just also about the historic districts. Furthermore, it is the purpose of this chapter to strengthen the economy of the city by stabilizing and improving property values in historic areas, and to encourage new developments that will be harmonious with the existing historic buildings and squares. Lastly, it is the purpose of the chapter to foster civic pride and to enhance the attractiveness of the community to residents, potential residents, and visitors. And then it goes on right after that to talk about the powers and duties of the Historic Preservation Commission, saying the commission shall have the following powers and duties. Number 7 is to review proposed zoning amendments that affect proposed or designated landmarks and historic districts. Full stop. So that we argue, and yes, we were on the losing side because the planning director and the city attorney decided otherwise, and that was the recommendation that the zoning board of adjustments decided to agree with. But you should also know that we had Sharon Worth there. And if you know Sharon Worth, she was did a couple of terms on the city council, and she was involved in writing the city code. And she stood up and she said, it was our intention to include the zoning text amendments, that they should come in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. So it's a little bit like if you have a discussion about the US Constitution and you say, well, okay, how do we interpret the Constitution? And you have James Madison coming in to testify, okay, this is what we had in mind. And then you decide, the panel then decides, oh, well, we're going to do something else because our administrator says it's that thing. So it's just something to think about, that I know and I understand. I did serve on the Historic Preservation Commission from 2000 to 2005. And I think that it's really important to have good training and good education, and really to understand what are the powers and what are the responsibilities of sitting in the position that you're in, and to kind of refresh our memories about what all is involved there. I also recommend attending. Has everybody attended the Preserve Iowa Conference? They have a really wonderful conference and they cover a lot of things. It's about historic preservation, but it isn't just about balustrades and that sort of thing. Just something to consider. Thank you.
All right. Discussion amongst the commission. So is there anything,
Yes,
just open floor? So
I've drafted a one-page document that I'd like to, can you project this, one of you?
I can't over here.
And I've got some copies for you folks too, I think. I might have enough.
Thank you.
You know, the purpose of this document is to discuss this issue of whether or not these text amendments would apply to the historic district and whether the Historic Preservation Commission should take a position one way or the other on whether or not they do. And this document proposes that we take the position that changes in use must be presented to the HPC before they go to the zoning authorities. So you can take a minute to read that and be happy to discuss it and see where we come out.
I can't get quite the entire thing on there, unless I make it smaller. And I don't know if it gets too small though.
I think we all have a print copy of it here too, Ray, so it should be good.
Basically, it talks about the meaning, what is meant by the words affect and respecting, and again, affect the historic district. And then under section 31.12, in the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, they state that those standards include that a property shall be used for its historic purpose. So based on that and based primarily on that, I think we should take the position that text changes to the zoning should be brought to the HBC. Changes that affect the use.
I agree with this. I was at the ZBA meeting and there was a lot of discussion about the word affect, and the interpretation that was ultimately made by the city and endorsed by the ZBA was that in this case, when a building changes use, it has no effect on the district. And I think that that is incorrect. I think that changing a use of a facility does affect the district. And so I think that being clear about potentially affect the use of a property, I think that means that it is within our remit. And I agree with this.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that just because I believe that there are many historic properties throughout the United States and within the city that have had their uses changed since they were built in the 1800s, for example. So like there are downtown structures that have changed their uses multiple times throughout the history of those properties. That doesn't mean that those uses were invalid somehow. I think that we need to really consider what the use actually is instead of just this broad definition of use, and understand that like what they're doing is bringing value to a community and also recognizing like certain members of a community that are otherwise unseen. And I think that is a valid use. And I think that use should be included and considered with the additional use changes that have been seen throughout the history of this community and communities at large, not just Ames, but all over. I think that denying specific or kind of focusing so much on the use kind of reflects bias almost against what is the use in mind, rather than being concerned with, are we changing it from a residential to a commercial or something like that, or industrial. I think that is really what the use that they're talking about is, not specifically about this kind of use. In my personal opinion, I think that it's a little bit going into semantics. And I think that what they're doing is proper. If the zoning board and commission has said so, if the director of the planning department has said so, I think that they're winning. And I think we're dragging at straws here to have a chance. But I think that the city has made it clear where they do lie on this. And I think that if we're not changing it completely from certain zoning, from residential to commercial to industrial, for example, and all of those other things, I think that that is more of what the use I imagine in my head is. And I think that if we're not doing something super radical, I think that this is an important aspect of our community, and the people that they're servicing are important to our community too, as well. So I'm going to stick with that.
I'm not talking about Romero House in particular. That ship has sailed. That issue's over. I'm just talking about going forward. For instance, the Historic Preservation Code talks about the entire community. It doesn't talk about one house. It talks about the effect of a change on the entire community. And in my opinion, if a house in a community is turned into, say, a liquor store or a cannabis shop, when those rules happen, or whatever, that does have an impact on the community. And so I think that it's up to the Historic Preservation Commission and up to the Zoning and Planning Board to look at the different uses that are requested and make those determinations. I'm not saying no change of use should happen. I'm not saying all changes of use should happen. I'm saying that I think we're part of the process. We make a recommendation along with the zoning board that go to the city council that determine, is this use consistent with the intent of the city, or is this use inconsistent?
I understand. I just think one thing too is that when I think of historic preservation, I am more concerned with the structure of the building and the interior. Really, I personally feel like we have no say, particularly over what people are doing within their own home, within their own property. They bought that property; they are the rightful owners of that property. And like, you know, anyone, I think, if they want to own a home that was built, this is just a random example, that they built in 1850, for example, and it was a residential, and then they decide that actually they're going to do all these different things on the inside of it. I think that's kind of beyond us. I think we're more of if the physical outside is going to be changed, if the physical exterior that will be seen every day by other people in the community, that sure, I think we can go with that. But I do believe that if the planning director and the ZBA and all of these other things have said that we're not necessary, and the city council has also deemed that, I think that it's been deemed. And I think that also is because it's the physical versus the intangible on the inside. And it's like, we're not here to control the intangible spaces within what a structure looks like. We're here to determine what the character outside looks like. In my personal opinion, obviously, we can disagree on these things. But that's just what I think. And I do think that when it comes to whether or not we can determine uses, it will go against certain demographics and certain peoples as well. When we start getting into that nitty-gritty detail of what can a historic property be used for and these details, because sure, like maybe you don't want to put a liquor store in Old Town. I understand that because there was one that came in close to it, and I was like, that's a bit of an odd location. I understand that, and you don't want to like in historic downtown or something like that. But I also think that we do have a commitment as well to providing services that if the uses are good and they're holistic and they're providing value to any member of our society in like a real way, you know, I think that those uses can go above and beyond us if the physical exterior of those properties are not being altered in any way. And if there is substantial enough cause of need for a community to have such a thing, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. I disagree
Okay.
completely,
No,
but
that's
it
fine.
makes sense.
It makes sense, but what we're talking about here is the process.
Mhm.
Okay? That this may have come before the commission and we may have said, that's fine.
Right. I'm not saying anything.
And
I'm
it's
saying
just a
that
recommendation anyway, but to promote cooperation and communication between the different entities of the city, why not follow what the subsection 29 says, or section 29, 11.1102.
So in the history of the Historical Commission, has this come up before?
I think before, as I understand it, from talking with Sharon Worth, in the past, uses did come to the commission when it was first established. It's only been over time because there have been so few people that have applied for text amendments. There are a lot of things that have happened in Old Town that never should have happened. And it's been so seldom that this has happened that in the last 5 or 8 years, there have been few that have ever come up. There have been a couple that came up. But in general, the city has allowed uses to change without ever bringing it to anybody. And so a precedent has been set because they never notified, they never thought about it. In fact, if you talk to Kelly Dykeman, he'll say, yeah, we never really thought about that before. And now we don't think we should. But if you talk to Sharon Worth, she would tell you when they established the commission, it wasn't the intent that these would.
But the recent history is they have not. So now, are we feeling slighted this time? But for the last 7 or 8 years that it's happened and nothing was brought to us for our approval, and it just.
Again, what's happened has happened. We're not going
Right.
to change the past. But I would think that 2 wrongs don't make a right. And if the intent was to do this in the past, then going forward, we should try to get back to what the intent was. Or they should take use out of the whole system and be very clear. But use is throughout that code. When you read the code, use is throughout it.
Well, that's, yes. So, going forward, maybe use should be taken out of the code. And that would be, if we're going to make amendments, proposal for amendments, that would probably be one I would bring forward next week or next month, is that this use is taken out. I agree with William that the primary intent of the commission should be the exterior structure of the facilities, maintaining them correctly. And we probably shouldn't be involved in use. I wouldn't like it very much if somebody told me I can't do whatever I'm doing in my house. I wouldn't, as long as it's legal, then,
Right, but these zoning amendments are to change what is legal. Right now, what is legal is you can't do X, Y, Z. The text amendments come up to say, I want to change what's legal. So we're not telling somebody what they can or can't, that they can't do something that's already legal. We're changing what is legal. That's the purpose of the text amendment.
so the last question would be, we want the way we're kind of reading this is we want the use of the properties to be what they were historically intended for?
No. The intent is that when somebody comes in and they want to say, I want to change the use of this building. There's zoning that's already been passed by the city. I want to change how the city zoned this. It would come to us and we'd say, do we recommend that the city approve that change in zoning? Or actually, do we recommend to the zoning commission? Do we recommend they approve that change to what is legal? Or do we think, no, we don't think that change in legality should be approved? That's the issue. It's changing what is legally allowed.
And I think a case study or an issue of that I can think of without going down the path of Romero House and opinions there and whatnot, just a completely separate theoretical case study is somebody comes in and, I mean, again, theoretical, because I don't think planning would approve this anyways, but say somebody came into the historic district, bought a property, then was going for an amendment that, hey, I want to put a commercial restaurant in here. When it comes to us to think about it through the historical conduit, not from a tax purpose, not from a city finances purpose, not from any of that, but our conduit of being the Historic Preservation Commission, we could look at that and say, oh, a commercial restaurant, that means you're adding a makeup air unit on the site, on a roof, in the yard, somewhere that's going to require screening. You're going to have a grease duct going through this building that's going to put a big hood on top of my building now. That's gonna be a blemish on the historic fabric of the structure. And that's where we could make a recommendation per se, like, hey, this is going to make a visible impact from the exterior of this building, which is what we've been assigned as our purview to kind of be, the custodians to. So a thread such as that is where it makes sense to me that we are involved in making a recommendation when a proposed change in use that's not already allowable by right in the ordinance comes forward. So that's kind of where I sit on that one in terms of thinking it does make sense that that's something that the HPC would review. And I think kind of going to the letter here Bob wrote and going back to the one we had sent the council before, I think, again, my stance on this, where we're coming from too, is we're not trying to vote on anything here on Romero House or anything else on what, whether we approve of a use or not right now. This is, the way I'm looking at this discussion, is us bringing it up again to other parties within the city, and yes, saying we feel slighted a little bit. We went through an official communication channel and sent a memo to the city council, to the mayor, to staff, and we got zero reply.
Well, maybe that is the reply.
We should still get even if that's a reply, we should get a response from saying, hey, here's our stance. It shouldn't go through you. And we could, okay, but we have had zero communication on this topic from the city. When they send us memos to say, hey, we want a recommendation on this or whatever, we reply to them. It'd be nice if they replied to us as well. Otherwise, sitting on this commission and receiving zero feedback from anybody in the city, with the exception of Ray, who does a great job with us, hearing from nobody else, even when we send a memo to them, to me, makes it pretty evident that the reason we are here is because Ames wanted to be a certified local government, and there's a requirement in there that you must have a Historic Preservation Commission to do so. And that's why we are sitting here. They don't care about us beyond that. That's what I got when I sent a letter and got zero response. So that would be where I stand on it, in terms of wanting to reiterate to the city that we would like to be in, not saying that we want to determine the answers, but we would just like to be involved in the communication with it and have an understanding as to why they feel that we aren't to review a certain situation. I'm not saying I want to force them to make us review it. I just want an explanation from, staff or the attorney or whoever on their interpretation of it, how they read it, as to why they felt that was the answer. That's all I'm looking for in this. I'm not looking to be the decision maker on this. As we said, they've gone through other channels, obviously, and ZBOA, unlike HPC, is a legal authority. Their word does have a legal binding to it. Ours doesn't. All we do is make recommendations. So they've already gone through that channel without us. But nonetheless, I'd be in support of sending some sort of response, just saying we want to reiterate that we'd like some explanation as to why we weren't involved, or simply why we weren't communicated with. Even just making us aware of a situation, saying, hey, this isn't your thing, just so you're aware, this is happening in the Old Town Historic District. Simple as that. It could be a staff comment at a meeting, but it never was.
Without taking a position on the zoning issue one way or the other, in my career, I was an administrative law judge, and I was basically an arbitrator in many respects. One overriding issue there was always when contested cases were disputed was poor communication or lack of communication, poor language in a document, work rules, whatever the document might have been, lack of clarity. That is what I'm seeing here from all of the parties, is that there is a lack of clarity between Chapter 29 and Chapter 31 with respect to the responsibilities of the commission and how that plays out. And then I've heard from the parties that there has been this humongous delay in this whole process. And that is not a good service to our co-citizens or the business community, either one. So I think there is something there that needs to be resolved by clarifying the duties and responsibilities. Whether we can do anything or not, like you say, there needs to at least be some communication. Had this just been automatically put before us some months ago, this all would have been resolved by now without the expense of finances and time that both parties have put forward, and the zoning board and this commission. So I think if we do nothing else, we need to talk to the city council and push for some kind of a response about how are we going to clarify this so that we don't have this recurring issue moving forward. And until we can get that done, I think we're going to be spinning our wheels.
I agree with you, but I think we ought to make it clear to the city council what we think, even if we have differing views, because some of us feel this way and some the other, because the city council knows what it thinks, and it thinks that we don't need to hear any of this stuff. And if some of us feel, no, your paperwork does say in many places that we should hear these things. And I think we ought to be clear to the city council. We believe what the code says, or what our interpretation of this. And if you don't want us to feel that way about it, you need to clean up your code. But I think we ought to make it clear that we disagree with the way they've interpreted it. Otherwise, I think the answer is going to come back, yeah, we do not think you should have anything to do with that stuff. And that will be it.
I think we're talking about process here, and just to give a couple more examples in addition to the commercial restaurant, what if there were a zoning textual change that allowed a bar and nightclub in a specific house, or a preschool with 30 or 40 kids? I think those would affect the noise level in the neighborhood that would be inconsistent with the history, as well as increased pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, loitering, drunkenness, whatever. And although it's very unlikely that we would have that the specific zoning changes would take place, I think there ought to be a process where the Historic Preservation Commission has some input on it before it gets as far as it has in this case.
I feel kind of torn on that because there's examples of certain, like you could argue historic properties, they aren't actually designated as historic properties, but like in Campus Town where they bulldoze them and then put student housing, would it rather be that we just don't put in student housing? Because you could make that case that you shouldn't be adding student housing into certain areas in Ames then as well, because of historic properties or other valuable like assets like that. And then that's, if you're going to say, oh, well, this is the process and stuff like that, then I feel like it does open up. It still, to me, opens up examples of where there's going to be biases involved. I understand that might not be everyone's perspectives, but coming as a student, there are active forces in the city of Ames that do not want students in certain areas. And so they will do specific things in order to prevent students from residing in certain areas, just as an example, obviously. And I think that when we need to be focused on the aspects of we cannot control every finite detail of a zone. And also, if we're going to go back to historic uses, which I see here, used for historic purpose, and you mentioned the historic nature, if we're going to be talking about that, then like the city of Ames would be far more filled with pedestrianism. It would be far more walkable in certain avenues like that. So I think that we need to be careful with using historic nature and historic properties a lot more in that area, because we're not living up to the original, design of historic downtown, for example. That would have been very much more walkable in certain areas. That would have been a lot more pedestrians, and cars would not have been a concern. And so that is also within our realm. If we're going to be talking about use, then we should be able to disagree with, car-based infrastructure. And I think that probably is not on people's minds, but it's more about who can be in certain spaces, because that's what's been kind of brought up. And so I do want to push back on that. If that's going to be our goal, is to prevent certain uses that would prevent so many different types of people. And I understand, like, obviously, like nightclubs, no one wants those in quiet little downtowns. But when you're talking about like loitering and other of these things, I personally, I think that there is biases against folks who are going to be loitering, and those are predominantly going to be, unhoused people. That's going to be students. That's something that I saw in Huxley when I was in Huxley, where they have certain zoning where there's no loitering allowed, and it's predominantly focusing on teenagers. They don't want teenagers in certain areas. And I think that we do need to think about that and come to a conclusion of why we want the use so badly. You know what I mean? I don't disagree that it's a legal aspect, but I think we have to really understand and have like a real heart to heart about why we want to focus so strongly on the use and focusing on the historic nature of these areas. If we're not going to focus on it for everything, like the built environment, if we're not going to focus on car-based infrastructure that's polluting our downtown, or if we're just going to be focusing on who is able to be in these areas. And that's something that I really care about as a future planner. As someone who has just recently gotten education from Iowa State in these areas, this is something that we're thinking about constantly in our classes, and really kind of pushing back on. That's the new education now, is who is allowed in these zones and why do we have this zoning, and who are we preventing in these areas and who are we contributing to in these areas. And I think that's really important for me, because that's something that I really care about, is going to be environmental planning, historic planning, and also planning justice as well, not just for certain things. So I understand it's legal, but I need to know the draw that's so strong with having the ability to say yes or no on certain zoning decisions, or just having our input. Because I don't think use is relevant to historic preservation the way that we think it is. Personally, I think it's more about enabling that our community has beauty, has culture, has something that we can reflect on together entirely, instead of saying this belongs here, this belongs there, because that's not how it would have been in Ames in like the very early parts of the city. We used to have a neighborhood that was along Duff, and that's gone. We used to have a neighborhood that was along Lincoln Way, and that's gone. Now it's a bunch of different things. So we can't really argue that's the historic nature of Ames when Ames has changed so thoroughly from its original inception and its original state as a city.
But don't you think we should get input from everyone involved?
Yes, I agree with the input. I was
That's
saying
what we're
that I
talking
understand
about
with
here.
legal
Getting
things.
the input from
Right.
the HPC.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I think we need to, if we're going to argue, we need to accept our role here. I think we need to argue and understand each other when we're focusing so strongly on use. Like, why is it that we're doing that? If that makes sense.
The main focus of
Right.
the HPC is the external of the building.
Right, exactly.
Right, and this is just one little side issue that has come up.
Right. So because we're talking about going to city council and having our thoughts understood together. And that's why I'm bringing this up. It's because I think it's important that we as a collective understand why we want to focus on use. If that makes, that's what we're focused on. That's the wording that we're focusing on.
Right.
So I want people to be able to say, why do we care so much about this particular wording for this particular matter? I'm not disagreeing with anyone
Right.
about certain things.
I think examples of
Right.
uses that would be inconsistent
Right.
with historic appearance or nature have just been provided. A restaurant, a childcare, et cetera. So those are uses that I think we might want to say, this might have an effect on the appearance, et cetera. So I think those are good examples.
Right, but I also provided examples where use is being used to prevent certain folks from coming in. And I understand that that's not everyone's mind. Like not everyone's like, that's what I want. But like as somebody who's affected by zoning, as a student, and as somebody who has seen Campus Town be thoroughly destroyed of its historic character as a student, that was my spot. And yet there's no real concern for that zoning. But I understand that it's not historic preservation, but
Right. But we wouldn't say you can't change the use. We'd
Right.
just say, if you're
Right,
asking, could I finish?
yeah, sorry.
If you're asking to change the use,
Mhm.
we'd like you to come tell us how and why you want to do
Right.
that, so that we can ensure our recommendation only to the city isn't going to impact
Right.
the historic aspects that we're responsible for.
Right. So I'm
So
not,
it wouldn't have anything really, and we would have the opportunity as a board to say, that one's great, that one's great, we
Mhm.
need more of that, we need more of that,
Mhm.
et cetera, just as you're offering.
right. So I'm not trying to disagree with you guys on this. I'm saying we need to figure out what, like, if we're going to include use, what is the value that we so strongly want to control with that and that avenue? Just because I think it's important to have, if we're going to go with clarity, that's part of my question that I have for people here as well, is what is the clarifying of the uses that we want and don't want, because that's going to be something that's going to come up. Obviously, we've had disagreements about that just seconds ago, but what uses should be allowed or should not be allowed in historic properties. And that's something that I really want to have clarity on, because I don't want to have to either advocate or disadvocate for certain things. We should all be able to agree upon things. I'm asking for agreement on what we mean and the value of what we're talking about, not can we do it or can we not do it. That's really what I'm getting at is the crux of the problem that I'm having right now is the wording and the value that we have behind certain parts of the wording. Because documents can change and we can change them very, in an official manner. And we can go ahead with the legal process that we've mentioned. But I just really want to understand when we're looking at documents, what is and what is not permissible according to the specific wording that we're having issues with. Because if we're all not in agreement with what the words mean, it's never really going to get anywhere, no matter what conversation we have. That's kind of what I'm getting at in a really long-winded way. But that's what I think about. When I think of effect, that's vague. Affecting is very vague. Uses is very vague. And so anyone on this commission can argue one way or the other. But if we don't have an understanding, then we're not going to get there. We're just going to bicker all day. And I don't want that. You know what I mean? So I hope that makes sense. And I hope you understand I'm not disagreeing with anything that we have jurisdiction over, obviously. But I just want clarity about the value that we have on use and going forward with that. Because I think that if we're going to use the legal right that we have as commission to have a bias that might or may not be conscious or knowable, I really want to have that communicated, because there are going to be people that are going to deny that bias or agree with that bias. And so it's part of being a city council. And I just feel like this is something that we see often, is that zoning in particular was developed due to certain systemic factors in society. And so we just really need to contend with that, I personally believe.
How about this?
Mhm.
I would suggest that we would send a communication to the city council and the mayor requesting A, that they answer the letter that was sent to them, and B, that they would, that they understand that we think we have a role in evaluating and providing recommendation on things that potentially affect the use.
Right.
And that we could have a further conversation about uses in general that we think are consistent with historic districts, something along those
Great.
lines.
I would love that. I think that that's more of what, you're very good at concising what I was saying. I appreciate that.
Or something else, if you guys like better wording,
Nope,
I'm
I'll
good
just
for
leave it
that.
open for.
Right. 'Cause I just think clarity is so important.
Well, do we want to take a position, or can we take a position tonight as to what the commission's position is on this statute, 291102? Or do we want to table that till a later date?
Well, I would suggest you table it to a later date because I'm going to come here next time with a proposal that says we don't involve ourselves with use.
Well, I think we do need some more specific definition of these terms: use, effect, purpose, in the context of what our purpose is. And I think, if we don't have a binding recommendation towards the zoning board, it seems to me that we could easily be included to make our decision, and then they're going to do what they want to do. But at least they've got the Historic Preservation Commission's opinion on the record and any concerns that we might have. So I don't see the harm in simply making it a habit and practice for the zoning board to simply put it before us so that we don't get in on the tail end of the issue like we are now. And that, I think, would just resolve a lot of issues. Everybody'd have a chance to speak their piece. We would make a decision, a recommendation, and then it would move on and it would be out of our control, but we've at least represented the commission on any particular issue. And that's the one thing I have a concern about that didn't happen here. That we were excluded, and I'm not offended. I don't care about that. But I think that it limited what the public could say throughout the process. It limited knowledge about what was going on in our town outside of where the mailings were taking place. So I think that should be, whatever we come up with for further clarification is one thing. But I think that the term about our authority and responsibility should be relatively broad, especially since we don't have binding authority. If we did, maybe there would be more argument there, and I understand it would take a little more time, but here we are, and we're taking a lot more time than it would have taken anyway, if it would have just automatically, for anything in any historic district or zone, just come to us, we'll do our thing, get it out the door, and go on from there.
All right, as a suggestion, obviously everybody else can speak to it too, maybe to help kind of try and clean this up for the future. Obviously, there's multiple interpretations and ways of reading what's in the ordinance right now. I mean, that's evident. So we, part of our work plan and goals, obviously, is continual review of chapter 31 in the ordinance. So as that, perhaps we put it as a topic for our next meeting in which we would discuss, the particular language that is occurring here that's been stated, in front of us, and kind of communally come up with how not only how do we currently interpret it, but also what would our, as a group, suggestions be to staff on, if we feel that, come to a conclusion, feel that way on how the ordinance should be amended to make this clear in the future on what the process is, what our involvement, how much or little it is going forward. Any thoughts on
Is that a motion?
that? That would have been more so, I'd say that's less of a motion and more of a tabling the discussion to be further and more in depth towards the topic of how we read this and what, and people can think up over the next month what it would be, what any potential suggested language changes in the ordinance would be to either further solidify, interpretation of our involvement in it, or if it's, the other way to lessen it, but, it could be either or, but just that more discussions upon that language occurred to come to a conclusion that, it could be a motion that's voted on.
So I would then move to table the issue for further discussion at next month's meeting with not necessarily reaching a conclusion at that meeting, but more discussion, more perspective, more ideas for how to clarify or define our role and the process.
I would agree with that, but I would like to say we should, I think, set a goal for ourselves to get this done at some point, because we can talk about this for forever. And we're not going to do anybody any good if we just talk about it and never, ever end up with some decision. So I think we need to come to a recommendation, one way or the other, whatever it's going to be, at some point, maybe, by March or whatever you want to say. But I think we need to set a deadline for ourselves.
I think that's a valid point. I think that we could, if we have the discussion, I think we could get to a point where we'd hold a vote in March. I think that would be enough time for written or verbal proposals, and hopefully enough time for the city council to get back to us.
Yeah, I
I
still
second
think,
your motion to table, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I still think we should send a letter or something to the city to say, hey, would you answer our letter, please? That's just bad governance.
I guess that's what I was going to ask.
Mhm.
If we do in fact table for discussion for next time,
Right.
is that going to be an internal, like, not, obviously not internal, but based on our interpretations only, or are we going to expect or hope that we would get a response? Like, can we say that we respectfully request a response by our next meeting so that we can discuss internally? And then with the idea that by March, we would come up with something concrete to be like, hey, this needs to change, or hey, moving forward, this is what we want to do. Like,
Yeah, I think
could we
that's,
expect a
Right.
response from the council?
I
or
think
the
that's
attorney
fair to
for the next
request, their interpretation and to have it in writing or something, just so we know where we're working from. It's, otherwise we can, it doesn't make sense for us to dream up ordinance and codes all day without actually talking to the staff and the city or the professionals that do this. So obviously they should be involved in it.
Right.
It's not,
Right. And no, I definitely would want some kind of a response from
Yeah.
the city council or the city attorney or whoever it may be beyond, because here was my initial impression too. If it took a legal opinion to address this issue, then it's clear that the language is not clear enough. And that's where I think we need to kind of focus, is clarification, like William said, because otherwise we're going to be spinning these wheels again and again. And yes, it may only happen every so often, but now is the time to get this clarification done.
I agree. And I would suggest in addition to getting input from how the city interprets it today, we ought to find out what was the intent when it was created, just for input. We may say, hey, we think that intent is irrelevant at this point. But I think understanding why people wrote it the way they did might be insightful. We may say they're nuts, but that's fine too.
So my motion, I guess, would include then a request to the city saying we're troubled by the communication here, and we'd like more input or more information, and we intend to discuss the matter ourselves. And maybe make a recommendation
Submit maybe some changes to the code.
or propose changes to the ordinances, yes.
I second the amendment.
Good luck writing that one up.
So, yeah, if you want me to condense? Okay.
Okay. All right, well, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that before voting on said motion? Or does anybody need clarification on what the motion entails? Okay, if not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 All opposed to the motion, same sign. All right, motion carries. Cool. It's still commission comments time, so anything outside of the topic we were just discussing that anybody wants to bring up?
I have a question. I think I was supposed to get training before I came on the commission. And I have to say, going through all this made me realize I'm not as trained in what the code says, what the bylaws say, what the scope is. Maybe all you guys are fully trained on this. I'm not. Is there something I'm supposed to read or have reviewed or gotten in terms of training? Because when I went back and looked at kind of the city's website on all this, it said, yeah, you're supposed to get training. And I never got any training. And I think
yeah.
the lack of consistency on this might result from some lack of training.
Yeah, the extent of training, that I guess I got when I joined the commission for the first time is they have, and what is it? They select commissioners in March or April, whatever it is. So that first one, April, May, before you hit your first meetings, they had, regardless of what board or commission you're on, we all meet here, and then they the city attorney's there and just kind of going through some of the legalese and stuff of being on a board or commission. So we were involved in that. That doesn't actually dig through specifically on each commission or whatever. They don't sit there and read all of chapter 31 to us and say, this is what it means. That's kind of up to us.
I didn't get any
go
of
read
that
it.
either.
Okay.
Did you guys all get that?
I didn't get the
But you
city
probably,
attorney,
yeah,
but I
I
got
think,
that's like
yeah,
a separate
maybe
smaller
it's
session
those
for
who didn't join right in the spring when they do the big rollover, maybe aren't getting that. Yeah.
Our first meeting wasn't
Mhm.
until,
Mhm.
summertime, late
Yeah.
summer. So I
Yeah.
never got to that. They never called me.
I got it from a class that I was doing. They teach
Like
you
that
how to do
class.
this planning law.
So there's no training materials that I missed.
Did
No.
you get a pamphlet when you first started?
No,
Okay.
got nothing.
I have a pamphlet at home. I can bring it. Yes.
Cool. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll move to staff comments.
No
All right.
comments at this time? Nope.
Nothing from staff?
Nope.
All right, that is all of the items on our agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.